Also das war ein Geschenk.
Rome, 1990. The world held its breath. In front of 73,000 fans at the Stadio Olimpico, Andreas Brehme stepped forward. Argentina, led by a battered but defiant Diego Maradona, stood just minutes away from dragging the final into extra time. But Brehme, calm, calculated, lethal, had a different plan. He didn't run. He didn't look nervous. With the weight of a nation on his shoulders, he struck the penalty with his right foot, precise, deadly, unshakable. The ball flew into the corner. Goicoechea dove the wrong way. Germany exploded. Maradona collapsed to his knees, sobbing. That was the moment Andreas Brehme broke Argentina's heart. It should have been the moment his name became eternal. But it wasn't. While others from that golden German generation rose to fame, fortune, and lasting admiration, Brehme quietly faded. No scandals, no headlines, just a slow erosion of relevance. His life after football became a whisper of debt, of personal struggles, of a legend forgotten. And then in 2024, when the world barely remembered his name, it was announced he had died of sudden cardiac arrest. The man who won Germany the World Cup had passed away, alone, in silence. This is the story of a quiet giant, a man with 2 golden feet who kicked open the door to immortality, and somehow still vanished behind it. To understand Andreas Brehme is to understand a unique moment in football history, a time when West Germany was both feared and transitioning, when football was hard, direct, and national identity was tangled with tactics and temperament. Born in Hamburg in 1960, Brehme was not made in the image of flamboyant playmakers or golden boys. He was a machine carved for precision and purpose. He began his journey in modest clubs, but his rise was inevitable. He had something different: ambidextrous power. Brehme could cross, shoot, and take set pieces with both feet. One of the few in football history who you genuinely could not predict. His right foot brought calm, his left brought chaos, and coaches loved him for it. By the early 1980s, he had cemented his place at 1, FC Kaiserslautern. But it was at Bayern Munich, and later Inter Milan, that Brehme truly stepped into the continental spotlight. Playing alongside fellow Germans Lothar Matthäus and Jürgen Klinsmann at Inter, he became part of a tactical revolution in Serie A, a league where defenders were kings and discipline was divine. Yet Brehme wasn't just another disciplined fullback. He had flair, controlled, subdued, but deadly. In a team of stars, he often played the quiet executioner, delivering inch-perfect balls or thundering home decisive penalties. He didn't need the spotlight. He was the moment before the explosion, and his place in the national team reflected that ethos. Under Franz Beckenbauer, Brehme was essential, not vocal, not theatrical, but always there, reliable as sunrise. He played every minute of Germany's campaign in the 1990 World Cup, and when it came to the final, when Matthäus, Germany's captain, didn't feel confident enough to take the penalty, it was Brehme who stepped up. That one kick, 85th minute, against Argentina, in a politically charged final just months before German reunification, was more than a goal. It was closure. Redemption for 1986. A statement. And yet, Brehme never celebrated like he had just made history. He raised his arms, but never his voice. That was who he was. But even as Germany celebrated, even as fireworks lit the sky and history books were rewritten, something strange began to happen. Brehme, the match winner, started to vanish from memory. Lothar Matthäus became a captain remembered. Klinsmann became a coach and icon. Beckenbauer, the Kaiser. But Brehme, he wasn't on television. He didn't pursue the limelight. He faded, quietly. And as his presence dimmed, so did the world's curiosity. The man who had scored Germany's most important goal since 1954 was drifting toward obscurity. But that wasn't the tragedy. Not yet. That came after. Because what happened in the years that followed, the descent, the debt, the isolation, was far more brutal than any football match. At the height of his powers, Andreas Brehme was untouchable. From the mid-1980s to the early 1990s, he was everything a manager could want: disciplined, versatile, lethal. At Inter Milan, he thrived under Giovanni Trapattoni in a German-led revolution that took Serie A by storm. Winning the 1988-89 Scudetto with Inter wasn't just a triumph. It was a statement. German efficiency could rule in Italy's chaotic theater. Alongside Matthäus and Klinsmann, Brehme became the backbone of one of the most iconic European trios of the decade. And yet, something was always curious about him. Brehme remained indifferent to fame. He wasn't like the others. He didn't court media attention, didn't engage in controversies, rarely gave provocative interviews. He played, delivered, and disappeared into the locker room while the cameras chased someone else. And that very trait, the silent professionalism that made him indispensable on the pitch, also began to push him into football's periphery off it. After his triumphant 1990 World Cup, Brehme returned to club football with a gold medal around his neck, but no parade waiting. He quietly moved from Inter to Real Zaragoza in Spain, a move many didn't understand. From there, he returned to Germany to finish his career at Kaiserslautern, the club where it all began. But by then, football was changing. The mid-1990s saw the rise of commercialized superstars, media-trained captains, and flashy forwards. Brehme, aged, quiet, and still playing like it was 1986, looked increasingly out of place. In 1996, he retired. There were no grand tributes, no farewell tour, no spotlight, and then came the unraveling. Brehme tried coaching, briefly managing Kaiserslautern, but the spark wasn't there. His stints were short-lived, unremarkable. Without football's routine and rhythm, his life began to drift. He launched into business ventures, but most failed. Friends later described him as trusting to a fault, often backing the wrong people, the wrong projects. Debt began to accumulate. By the late 2000s, the cracks were visible. Media began reporting that Andreas Brehme, World Cup winner, the man who buried Argentina, was struggling financially. There were whispers of unpaid loans, collapsed ventures, and tax problems. Some reports even claimed he was on the verge of bankruptcy. In 2014, the whispers turned into headlines. A former teammate revealed publicly that Brehme was in serious debt and facing the threat of losing his home. Offers of help came, some sincere, others humiliating. One sanitation company infamously offered him a job as a toilet cleaner to help him back on his feet. It was cruel. Brehme, humiliated, declined. At the same time, his mental health began to fracture. Friends described long periods of isolation, quiet suffering, and an increasing disconnection from the football world. While his peers became pundits, commentators, coaches, and public figures, Brehme remained a shadow. There was no major scandal, no drugs, no arrests. Just a slow, suffocating fall, marked by bad luck, misplaced trust, and a world that simply forgot. And yet, he never complained. In interviews, rare as they were, he spoke fondly of the past, never bitter. "I lived my dream," he once said. "I have no regrets." But his eyes often told a different story. A story of a man who gave his country its greatest footballing moment and was repaid with silence. There's something uniquely haunting about a hero no one comes looking for. Andreas Brehme didn't die suddenly. He faded, slowly, quietly. Long before the official announcement of his death in February 2024, his presence in the football world had been spectral. Rare public appearances, no coaching jobs, no punditry. While legends from his era were invited to galas, interviews, and legacy celebrations, Brehme was absent, not by defiance, by neglect. Behind closed doors, the truth was darker than the polite media silence would suggest. Friends in hushed tones spoke of a man consumed by solitude. His partner, Suzanne Schaefer, revealed he had suffered emotional hardship that never made the papers. His post-career investments had failed. Lawsuits had drained him. Offers for commercial appearances were sparse and sporadic. He had at one point taken small jobs to keep himself afloat. And though he was too proud to ask for help, those close to him said they saw the weight in his posture. But worse than the financial collapse was the psychological unraveling. Brehme, the metronome of German discipline, the master of pressure, the man who didn't blink in front of 73,000 screaming fans, was crumbling under the weight of invisibility. There were no statues, no streets named after him, no Brehme stand in Kaiserslautern. The man who had sealed Germany's most iconic footballing triumph was somehow not enshrined in the national memory. In interviews, his name was often an afterthought, trailing behind Matthäus, Klinsmann, and Völler. Even Maradona, whom he had vanquished, remained a mythic figure worldwide. Brehme was barely a footnote. Those who knew him say it broke him quietly. He wouldn't say it aloud, but there were signs. He declined interviews. He stopped attending club events. He missed reunions. When the 30th anniversary of the 1990 final came in 2020, Brehme was almost absent from the national celebration. A few clips were shown, a few old photos. No speech, no tribute. Some say he felt ashamed. Others say he felt erased. And then came the coolest twist, his health. In the last years of his life, Brehme was rumored to be struggling with chronic heart problems, possibly worsened by the stress and depression he had long hidden. He was rarely seen in public. When he did appear, he seemed thinner, slower, and tired. But still, he smiled. On February 20th, 2024, he was found dead in his Munich apartment. Cardiac arrest. He was 63. The reaction was immediate, but telling. There were tributes, yes. Former teammates posted photos, old clubs shared statements. But it was all after he died. After the man who won Germany the World Cup had left quietly, like a ghost. It wasn't just his heart that failed him. It was an entire system that forgot to check in on its quietest hero. He once stood on the roof of the world. And then, somehow, he fell through the cracks, unnoticed. It's easy to celebrate legends when they're loud, when they're charismatic, controversial, or colorful, when they fit the mold of what we think greatness should look like. Andreas Brehme never fit the mold. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't argue with referees or dazzle with tricks. He didn't sell shirts or start feuds. He played the game with surgical precision, with humility, and, ironically, with the kind of quiet bravery that should have made him unforgettable. But it didn't. And so we ask, how did we let a hero slip through our fingers? This channel doesn't believe Brehme's story is just about bad business decisions or fading fame. It's about something deeper, about how football, and perhaps society, sometimes forgets those who don't demand to be remembered. Brehme's decline wasn't scandalous enough for tabloids, nor dramatic enough for documentaries. There were no meltdowns, no addictions, no arrests, just quiet erosion. And maybe that's why he was abandoned, because the world craves noise, and Brehme was silence. But make no mistake, his legacy is louder than we've allowed. He scored the most important German goal since 1954. He was the metronome of two of Europe's greatest club sides. He played with both feet as if each were his dominant. And when Matthäus, the captain, the face of that 1990 team, stepped back from the penalty spot in the final, it was Brehme who stepped forward. How many players could have carried that weight? And yet, how many now carry his name in memory? Maybe that's the question we need to sit with. Did Andreas Brehme fail to stay relevant? Or did football fail to keep him close? Did we push him aside because he wasn't marketable? Because his quiet excellence didn't fit our thirst for drama? Or did we never really appreciate him in the first place? Brehme's story isn't just about decline. It's about what we value. About how easily we replace legends who no longer shine in the spotlight. And about how cruelly we measure worth, not by what someone did, but by how loudly they remind us they did it. So here we are, years too late, telling the story we should have told when he was still here to hear it. They say time forgets, but not always. Sometimes stories sleep in silence, waiting for someone to whisper them back into the light. Andreas Brehme's is one of those stories. He's gone now. No final interview, no farewell tour, just a quiet departure like the way he lived. But his legacy, though clouded by years of neglect, remains etched in the most sacred chapter of German football. That penalty in Rome wasn't just a goal, it was the exhale of a nation. The moment when heartbreak from 1986 turned into redemption, when East and West Germany were still divided, and Brehme's strike hinted at something greater: unity, identity, triumph. It wasn't just a football moment, it was a German moment. And yet, his true greatness wasn't in one kick, it was in the years before and after, in the discipline, the loyalty, the humility, in a player who could use both feet like weapons, but never used his voice to demand credit, in the quiet courage it took to carry a team without carrying the spotlight. Now, long after the roar of that final has faded, we remember him not with fireworks, but with stillness. And perhaps that's exactly how Brehme would have wanted it. In Kaiserslautern, the stadium he once called home, fans have begun leaving candles and scarves. In Milan, old Inter supporters post grainy photos of their favorite number 3. And across Germany, a new generation is asking, who was Andreas Brehme? The answer is simple. He was the man who stood up when others stepped back, the man who won a World Cup with a whisper, the man who, for one perfect moment, carried the weight of a nation on 2 quiet golden feet. He may have been forgotten by the system, but not by history, not by us. Some stories weren't meant to be buried. And now,